doing fine. How are you? So welcome to the final colloquium of the year for the Caput Center. This year our theme has been STEM education in celebration of our new STEM Ed PhD program. It started doing that again.
Oh, you got it.
And we hope that you'll enjoy us next year when our theme will be democratizing access. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Nicole Joseph, who's an assistant professor at Vanderbilt University. Her research explores two lines of inquiry. First, Black women and girls, their identity development and their experiences in mathematics. And second, whiteness, white supremacy, and how they operate and shape Black women's and girls' underrepresentation and retention in mathematics. She describes her research as a hub of research, discovery, and teaching activities that center on elevating and understanding structural barriers and forms of resilience that Black women and girls experience across various social contexts in society, and how intersectional interventions might be created to expand opportunities and increase pathways to success. Her work has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the National Academy of Education with Spencer Foundation, and internal university grants. And she was recently, in 2018, the recipient of both the AERA Scholars of Color Early Career Contributions Award and the 2018 AERA Division G Early Career Award. And today we are delighted to have her here to hear about her research.
Thank you. So I don't know what this is, but because I come from K12 teaching math, we just go with the flow. So thank you so much, Chandra and Karen, for recommending me. It's been a pleasure to have really good conversations today with some of the students here, and I just want to thank you for inviting me. So who am I? I always like to open to give people a little bit of an opportunity to know a little bit more about who I am. So I do identify as a critical scholar who is also a researcher. I also identify as a pedagogue, which means I think about teaching and learning from my graduate students to also like the students of my research. And I also consider myself an activist. This is a picture of a march that I do at Vanderbilt in Nashville that I founded 2 years ago. It's called March for Black Women in STEM. And what I have been able to do is to get support from multiple universities in the Nashville area, STEM faculty, STEM students, STEM undergraduate students, STEM postdocs come out for this march. It is growing. The first year was about 20 people. Now, last year, it was about 75 people, and I'm getting people who want to sponsor and do these other things, which really is moving outside of my skill set, so I'm having to get other people to kind of help me with that. But this is a project that, I just want to keep my feet to the ground with the people, because as a tenure track faculty member at a Research One institution, you all know that what we have to do is publish in journals. And the reality is that people, Black girls who are sitting in a middle school classroom in Metro Nashville, her teacher is not gonna read AERJ. That's just the real situation, right? So just trying to keep myself sort of grounded. I showed here Seattle Public Schools. This is Taft Academy. That's kind of where I got my beginning as a math teacher, grades 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. I've taught all kinds of curriculum from CMP, Mathscape, Turk investigations, a lot of those curriculum. And then I decided to go and get my PhD at the UW, University of Washington. When I graduated, I went to DU, the University of Denver, right out of my program, stayed there for about 5 years, and then Vanderbilt came knocking. So that was kind of a nice transition. The University of Denver really did support me in becoming, I think, a real high-level scholar. I got a lot of wonderful mentorship from the senior faculty there. This is my daughter, Gabrielle Russell, who just finished at the University of Arizona. She is an associate merchandiser at Nike in Portland, Oregon. and her starting salary I did not make until I was about 35 years old. So I said maybe I'm in the wrong profession, but maybe not. This is my husband Eric, and he's a real supporter, and I always like to just give them also credit, because you know that families have to, you know, endure a lot of our late nights, and you know the life of a faculty member. So that's who I am. These are some of the, what I call my signature publications that I've been thinking about, writing about for the last, I don't know, 5 years. This latest paper I'm really super proud of, that just came out in Harvard Ed Review. It's called Normalizing Black Girls' Humanity in Mathematics Classroom. And it's really arguing that Black women and girls have been dehumanized for a very long time, since really the beginning of slavery. As you think about the body of a Black woman basically birthed slaves as during that time. And that's where a lot of stereotypes come out in terms of like the angry Black girl, the over-sexualized Black girl, those stereotypes that you see that show up in our classrooms as well as in life. So, you know, this paper is saying there's something called inclusive pedagogies, which is a framework that my colleague Frank Tuitt designed that I use to think about the interviews these Black girls shared. And they talked about the ways in which their math teachers interacted with them that helped them to, number one, take more risks, to try, to want to take more math. And so this paper is really just trying to help the field see that, you know, because Black girls are coming into our classrooms and they have never been like positioned as producers of mathematical knowledge or producers of mathematical thought, these are some of the things that we can do. And then if you would like, you know, further information on some of these other ones, you can just let me know. So this is what I have planned for us. We're going to talk about what is the state of Black women and girls. Like what you know, what's the case? What's happening? And I thought we could do that through two what I'm calling learning community exercises. One are just the numbers, and these numbers are from the NSF report, the Women and Minority report that comes out. They update it every 2 years. It's the best data that we have. This data is self-reported from various institutions, but it's what we got. The second exercise is I'm going to ask your participation in reading some of the quotes that have come from empirical studies. In fact, if I can get somebody, Karen or Chandra, to help pass these tables out, that would be great, these papers out. We're going to talk about why equity may not be enough for change. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And then we're going to engage in what I'm calling truth telling, which is to really talk about like the culture of mathematics and how that culture really is embedded in whiteness and white supremacy. And we're going to talk about the word white supremacy because what I find is that people are scared of that word. They don't want to say that word because they have these ideas of, you know, that I'm talking about the Ku Klux Klan. Well, yes, that is white supremacy, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about everyday decisions that we make in our classrooms, in our admissions decisions, in our decisions about who to invite as a manuscript author, PI, all of those things, okay? Then I want to take us to talk about a little bit about frames and lenses as a way. I'll stop until we can get that out. We good? Oh.
The last room needs a few more copies.
So Robert DiAngelo is an incredible scholar who writes about white fragility. What does it mean to be white? She's really like a sister to me. She wrote a chapter in one of my books. I'm going to talk a little bit about her work about frames and lenses. to help us better understand why it can be so challenging for people to actually do some of these things around understanding their decisions around social justice and equity, those kinds of things. And then because I'm not a Marxian, I'm gonna end with some hope and how we can, what we can do. Because, it's bad, but there are some things that we can do. Okay, so before we go into this conversation, I need 7 people, different people, to help me read some of these norms. I've been doing this a while, and what I find is that people are often uncomfortable. They get a little woo, when you're talking about issues of equity and you're talking about these issues. But the reality is that we got to figure this out together, y'all, really. And so I just like to set the tone for when we're having these conversations, because everyone's voice and everyone's perspectives and everyone's ideas should be honored, right? So if I could just get 7 people, it don't matter, you don't have to raise your hand. Just read those real quick for us, please.
Listen actively, respect others when they're talking.
Speak from your experience instead of generalizing. I instead of they, we, and you.
Do not be afraid to respectfully challenge one another by asking questions, but refrain from personal attacks. Focus on ideas.
Participate to the fullest of your ability. Community growth depends on the inclusion of every individual voice.
Instead of invalidating somebody else's story with your own spin on her or his experience, share your own story and experience.
The goal is not to agree, it is to gain deeper understanding.
Be conscious of body language and nonverbal responses. They can be as disrespectful as words.
Thank you, and I just realized that this should say they if I'm trying to be inclusive of non-binary folks, so forgive me for that. Okay, so you have a table of statistics. So what I'd like for you to do is, so basically the way I did it was I looked at all men and women. Those are PhDs in the mathematical sciences, which does include statistics. So you have men and women, and then I said, out of that, here's the total number of women, and then here's the breakdown of those women into various races and ethnicities. And then on the second page is I think people in the back, the percentage of degrees that went to white males, and it's like 70, some average is like 75%. 3/4 of the degrees, and so I didn't even bother to break out the men. So take a quick look at that. I want you to turn and talk to a neighbor, and basically the question is, what do you notice, and what story do you think is told about the disproportionality of women of color or black women in mathematics? Kind of what do you hear out on the street, but also what do you think is the reason? And so I'm not gonna give you a long time, because this is just to sort of dive in a little bit. So go ahead and share for about 5 minutes. But I'm going to check in at 3. Yes.
Do you want us to hypothesize that without context what may be inferred from the table, or do you want us to look at the table?
I would all of this. Whatever can take mathematicians.
What is it?
What is it? Table, I don't want to grab the only one I did.
Oh.
I guess I made that. I don't recall
We only have the
table, and then the excerpt.
yeah, we didn't even. Yeah, we only did one.
Oh, okay.
The same kind of thing. But in my standing in the class, so a lot of my but I never really
Usually means not. Yeah, I don't know why it's not real. We wanted the team all it is first
That's everyone. I mean, I think that's to graduate mathematics is not like, yeah, it's like a whole other game. So those numbers, I mean, those, that report, the report has all of that. We're not talking about that. The reason why I talking about those people have needs, right? So, you know, I want, if I want about these grants that we have in the world, that's what I care about. But you would also they get more bachelor's degrees now. Black girls get more bachelor's degrees. Okay, so that's the bell. So, what did you all talk about? I want to get a few comments. I have good wait time, so I'm not even scared. I'll just wait. Yes.
One of the things that we noticed is that the general population of women as a doctorate, it has gone up, and kind of consistently, and the white women it's gone up, but for the black women has gone up and down.
And I think that peak, was that like, what year was that? It was kind of like, yeah, there was, because I was like, what happened? So I started talking to people, and there was some initiatives across the country of really trying to, around funding, trying to get women to go into the program. And, you know, I don't know of of any program like in 2019 that is specifically trying to pipeline in, Black women and girls into the PhD in mathematics.
But across the years, do you think these differences are statistically significant? Because, I don't know, from 16 to 11 to 16 doesn't make, I don't know. So there is a numerical difference. Is it
I think it's significant.
Okay.
The fact that there's, 700 and something men getting this and 5 Black women getting it. So to me,
Yes, that difference is clear.
that is, it's like, now the bachelor's degree, of course I don't have this on here, but but you can look at, it's all of the tables, and table 7 in that report has like, bachelor's, master's, whatever. Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia is like one of the largest producing STEM majors of Black women because it is a Black women's institution. Unfortunately, they don't have graduate programs. So they get these bachelor's degrees in mathematics, and then, some of them go on to PWIs, but the majority, you see the drop off really, really bad. When it comes to the PhD. And I was sharing with Professor Jay that the reason why I focus on the PhD is because when you're talking about who's at the table to make decisions, to think about the grand challenges that we have in our world, from environmental stuff to, sex trafficking, like whatever. It's people with PhDs that are sitting at the table. So if we want Black women's voices to be a part of the decision-making that is happening, that's where we've got to get them. Now, you all know that, if K12 is terrible, then we're not gonna get them into higher ed, right? So there's all kinds of implications for what we need to do in K12 education as well. But this is why I choose to look at the PhD and sort of look backwards. Somebody's hand was up.
I was saying, isn't the percentage actually going down?
Yeah, and those numbers are very similar for physics. They're similar for engineering, computer science. The only science, which is not a hard science, that we actually see parity is biology. So of course biology doesn't have like a ton of math, right? Did I see another hand in the back?
I was just going to say that there's plenty of documentation that there are some sensitive transition, at every sensitive transition period, women who have aptitude, take a step back. So I think you were going to close with what can we do, but we've got to look at those transition periods from elementary to middle, from middle to high, from high, and so on. Because I think there are plenty of women, but they just don't, I think it's a confidence issue. So it's a heads up to their teachers and their guidance.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. There's a report, it's called Black, I hope it's okay that I write on the board?
Yep.
Okay. Black Girlhood Interrupted. Anybody read that? It was put out by Georgetown Law School, or law, whatever that, Georgetown School. The findings from this book are gonna break your heart, okay? So basically, there was a relatively small sample. I think the sample was like 450 people, right? These were everyday Americans just walking down the street, educated people. About 76% of them were white. But the question was like, asking them about their perceptions of Black girls in comparison to white girls. And basically what they said was, Black girls need less nurturing, less comfort, that they know like about more adult topics, and so they introduced this term called adultification. That Black girls are essentially adultified, right? So that gets taken up sometimes by teachers. So even in like, kindergarten, if you see a Black girl that is, maybe just doing what she is not supposed to be doing, I think what the paper is trying to argue is that when it's her, she gets like extra harsh discipline because they see her as you should know better, like more adult-like, rather than, what a little 5-year-old is gonna do if you sitting up, if they bored or whatever, right? So the heartbreaking thing is that when you look at the graph, where do you think the peak happened? If this is age on the axis. Where do you think the peak, the highest age?
For adultification.
For adultification. What age do you think it was?
5, 10.
It was age 5. So, I'm just gonna mark these, it's not segmented right. But I was like, well, I'm gonna predict that, age 13 is probably where it's gonna be. It was like way up here at age 5. So my point is that if we are starting Black girls in the early age of 5 and we are seeing little adults, or we're seeing like girls that are problematic, that are, talking too much, that are whatever, and we're suspending them, we don't see future physicists. We don't see future mathematicians. So what happens is that gets taken up, and teachers, and I'm a diehard teacher advocate all day long. But what happens is sometimes we both subconsciously and maybe consciously take up biases in our classrooms where we are disproportionately treating Black girls in more of a negative way, rather than trying to deeply understand like Black girlhood or Black culture, or maybe my lesson was boring, or we don't think about those things, right? And so there are lots and lots and lots of consequences for this story of why we just don't see them. So the second handout are quotes that have come from this set of studies. Okay, some of them, as you can see, are mine. Some of them are other colleagues. And so what I'd like for you to do is I'd like to invite people to read those quotes out loud, just like you did the norms. Again, no need to raise your hand. Just read it, and read it nice and loud so we can see. So we can hear. Anybody? Just one, and then somebody else reads the next one, like that.
Don't worry, Tamara. Even if you score low, you will still get in because of affirmative action. There are hardly no Black students at a private high school. So people assume that we are somehow below them. Like, even though we have degrees in math and science, our HBCU degree can't hold up to their degree from a white school. Like it's below because we go to school that is the reject school in their people at PWI's eyes.
For 9 weeks, 30 or 40 white men ignored me completely.
It seemed to be that conversations before class on mathematics between classmates quickly terminated if it appeared that I was listening.
This was my first experience attending school in a vacuum.
It was a summer class that met at 7 a.m. in the morning, in which I was the only Black and the only woman.
My mathematical isolation was complete. I was not acquainted with any Blacks who had interest in these subjects.
I just had to sit down and say to myself, okay, I know I wanted to get my PhD from here, but in some respects, a PhD is conquered, so they don't want you to get it. You won't get it.
I think it's all sort of attributed to this one guy who would say horrible things about not being able to succeed in mathematics. Pull you into his office like, you shouldn't be here, and stuff like that. STEM majors, I think just in general, are very, very rigorous. But if you took away the factors of being a woman of color, it's almost to the point where it's so strenuous to get things done, and you feel like even when you do, it's not enough. As a Black woman, I can't fail, because if you fail, then you have like the weight of the world on your shoulders, and it almost has this in front of everybody else is succeeding and everybody else is doing great. But if you're not doing great, what's wrong with black people? So it's this constant thing hanging over you. I have to always do great. My test scores have always got to be great. Every time I present, I always have to be great. Or when I, come up with a research idea or whatever, it has to be the top of top whatever, because if I don't, then I'm going to get kicked out or I don't belong. I don't deserve to be here, so it can be very taxing.
Faculty didn't care whether I finished or not. They were fast-paced and the students were competitive in the sense that they didn't want to share their knowledge.
One of my study partners, I remember him saying on one of our exams, we did okay. Not as good as any of us had wanted to do. I got a higher beat than he got, and he says, I thought I'd done at least as good as you.
I think the reason why black women and girls in STEM is not emphasized is because I don't think whites want it to be available.
So there's a set of discussion questions. There are 5. You do not have to respond to all 5, but I would like for you to turn and talk perhaps to a different neighbor and just pick one of those questions to have a discussion about those quotes. And I'll set the timer.
Yeah, my back is to you now.
They're excluded.
Very upsetting. All the students felt like outsiders.
Yeah, but they had to be above and beyond.
I know women, and those she actually goes to meetings and tests whether or not they're paying attention to her. She said, if I get demeaned, they think that's fine, so I have to be willing to do that.
It's interesting, I have a 15-year-old son, I have a 16, and he goes to
It's a burden. The burden really struck me in this one, but I didn't know about.
I mean, it's somewhat familiar. Yes. Yesterday's song, Elizabeth must have asked, why are you running for president? And she said, she kind of crouched down to talk to the girl. It must have been like 6 or something. She said, why are you for president? Because that's what girls do. And so Elizabeth Warren is doing so it's many women and I don't know what they do is constantly conscious, like you said, the extra work they're doing to build quite the perception that girls is racist.
They can have what they need is valid. Yeah, but I'm not talking here. Sorry. But
Negative is anybody, I guess, at some point, but this idea
I'm sure that there are some similarities. But some of the black women are talking about also talk about how my board is also challenging. So you would think, right, so it's both. It's gender, this is why Black women are very interested. You know, how you have programs where you can
Right, that's it, really. Because if you talk about
Black
failure is one of the paths to success, right? And ultimate success. So without that, everything is high stakes.
So they find themselves
With that much more,
this is why
less
tools to help us
even if you succeed.
No, but not biological.
So I'd say, it's surprising to hear people talk. One of the references I use to people think about what does such and such look like.
That the Black teachers are just seen as, they're not seen as like specialists, but they're just seen as like a disciplinary people.
In fact, this was, I think, something that a professor doesn't look like one.
Okay. Yeah, Travis is doing great work, and now that he's transitioned, very good. Okay, so let's share out a little bit some of your conversations. I keep looking that way because usually there's a clock.
Every time you do, I do the same. So, and I know.
Everybody usually has an old
material to talk about.
Okay.
There's nothing like that.
We are very innovative here.
Okay.
I'll put my phone up there.
Okay. No, I have my phone. So what did you all talk about when you read those?
Well, one of the things that I think we collectively focused on was the ability to fail is not provided in enough and often enough.
I don't think mathematics is a culture that allows anybody to fail. Like, because we have courses that weed students out, like regardless of who you are, right? We have courses that weed people out. You know, I've heard of, mathematicians getting up in front of the class on day one saying, well, 3/4 of you are gonna fail this class, right? Who does that? So this is why we have to change the culture. But then when you think about when you intersect gender and you intersect race on top of that, it gets even more complex for students that are sitting in these classrooms. So yeah, absolutely right, yes.
I noticed the tension between representativeness on one hand, but also being considered a rarity on the other, which ends up with a lose-lose. For example, if you get into one of these PhD programs, you're a rarity, which means you're not representing typical Black. But on the other hand, if you fail, all of a sudden you're representing all of them. So it's a huge tension, unnecessary responsibilities of representation of race. And there's also the danger of considering people of particular race to be homogeneous.
That's right.
Which is a huge problem as well. So there's no personal agency in it. It's like you're either doing something for your clan, which is not supposed to be there, or you're an exception and you may be given access, but it's really a very challenging way to exist.
Yeah, that is really powerful, that tension paradox. My colleague Luis Leiva, who is also a scholar and a researcher at Vanderbilt, is writing a paper right now doing some analysis of Black women in undergraduate math and STEM classrooms. And he's telling the counter stories of 2 Black young women. And one of those young ladies said, I don't sit in the back of the class because those girls, now she's talking about another Black girl, that Black girl, she acts, ghetto, and I don't want my reputation to be tainted by that, so I'm going to sit in the front. Now, there's only 2 of them in this class where you would think they need to, come together to support each other. But that is trying to nuance this notion of a monolithic black girl. That what you're saying, that there are differences. And so to me, the girl who was like sort of distancing herself, she's internalized stereotypes about black girls. So I tell people this all the time, you don't have to be white to enact whiteness or white ideologies, that somehow white is better, or that you're smarter, or do you know what I'm saying? So
But they are in an institution that is already operating under the Western high school.
Absolutely.
So success means they have to show that kind of.
Well, some do and some don't. This last study right here, the troubled success of black women in STEM, that's my colleague, Dr. Ebony McGee. You know, in her study, there were other women who said, I'm gonna be my whole self in this space without looking at the white gaze. So you take it or you leave it, right? Now, that's not the norm, which I think you're suggesting, but those things, those sort of characteristics do exist. So the only paper I want to point out is this paper. This is actually in a book, an edited book, but this paper, I studied the lives of the first 5 black women mathematicians. Not math education, they have PhDs in mathematics. And the quotes where they were saying at 7 o'clock in the morning, I get up, so that was from that one, and the one where they said, I have complete isolation, so they talked about that. Now these women, the first woman was Euphemia Haynes. She got her PhD from Catholic University in like 1943. 1943 was just like yesterday, right? And these women went to University of Chicago, Yale, Catholic, like they went and got their PhDs at crazy, prestigious institutions, right? And so, of course, naturally, it wasn't a surprise that they were experiencing some of these things. At the same time, you can see the challenges that they experienced even as trying to be, mathematicians. I calculated like how much money they got in grant funding. I calculated like how many publications they got. And many of them went sort of back into like K12 education. Some of them went into industry because trying to survive in the academy was very, very challenging, right? So just wanted to point that out. I would love it if you would read it to get a little bit more context about that. So here's a question for you. I know some of y'all have seen this, right? And we talk about equity work, and we're doing equity work, and blah, 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 blah. And so I want you to answer this question. Which quadrant represents your idea of what equity in math education looks like? Is it this one, this one, this one, or this one? Or maybe it's, somewhere in the middle or includes both of them. But all of us, have thought about, equity in some way. It may not be directly, we may not directly frame our work in equity, but some of us have thought about that. So think about it for a second, and then if anybody is brave, hopefully I've created like a space for you guys to feel comfortable to share, if somebody can share. Oh, yes, sorry, I didn't see it again.
I don't even think that my conceptualization of equity is represented. I feel like maybe reality might be the closest one, but I feel like some students of color don't even like get a box. Like they don't have access and opportunities. Like you might see some access and opportunities or interventions, in affluent communities, But if you're going to like Chicago or the deep South, you know, where they're always discussing, you know, or reporting on the statistics of how, you know, not only are these students dropping out, but, you know, they're not interested in STEM. You don't really see opportunities given to them. So I feel like the reality isn't even the reality for most students.
Yeah, I mean, this little guy is actually in a hole.
I think that if it was just a bunch of holes, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I think when I think of equity, I think I'm with deliberation. I think because all the other ones are within the confines of the system.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, it's always trying to get them outside of the system. I think we read something recently. I think it was like by Megan May in philosophy, and they're talking about you have to create alternative forms of equity that are outside the confines. Because if you're going to just make people go back into the normative systems, then what's the point? Because it's going to do with their oppressions and everything else.
Yeah. So, you know, we have math teachers that say, you know, I give all of my students the same curriculum, you know, I treat them the same, and this is what we have. But you still have the fence, which for me are, you know, structures. So institutionalized racism, tracking, teacher tracking, like we can go down the list, right? And then, you know, I think a lot of people think like this, where they say, well, you know, my most vulnerable students, I'm going to give them, you know, what they need. So you can be, you know, providing extra help or creating co-curricular courses or doing concurrent enrollment. Like you can be doing those things, but you still have these structures here that haven't changed. People's decisions are still, you know, the same. Right? And then where you're talking about liberation is really where we actually get rid of the structures. This is really, really, really hard to do, right? Because it's going to require people to relinquish power, to change the things that the ways that we've always done things. You know, they're trying to get our dean and I love our dean, by the way, trying to make her give up the GRE, for example, for admissions decisions. I mean, if Harvard is doing it, why can't we? But the reality is that she really cares about rankings. And she's an incredible dean. She has supported me as a junior faculty of color. You know, I mean, I can just list out all of the wonderful ways that she has supported me. But she is not giving up that GRE because she cares about those rankings. And if you know, the rankings come out through the U.S. News and World Report. It's real shady how they do that. But anyway, the GRE could also be another example of like a structure that we still have in place, right?
I think it's also important to understand that this issue is not educational. It is socio-political. So if we think about this, these boxes as just the school providing some resources and completely ignore the parental, the familiar, because after what you just said here, I've been thinking about the age 5 because it absolutely didn't make sense. And please forgive me if I'm wrong. This is just my interpretation.
Sure.
And me sort of playing with it,
Sure.
I also thought about from some of the documentaries that I watched. I also know that the level of incarceration of African American males is very high in the United States. So I started wondering, to make sense of age 5, are these girls playing moms at home already as young as 5? Because their responsibilities may be very different than if their fathers may be in prison. You know? Maybe their roles, identities are shaping very differently than what is considered to be a normally developing child.
So let's just say that that's true. When a child comes to school,
right,
where I'm paying my taxes, right? I am expecting the teacher to do everything that they can to support my child, to learn, right? So I may not be able to change as a teacher. I may not be able to change anything that is happening at home, but what I'm going to do in the classroom, I'm going to make sure that I'm doing everything that I can. And so I'm not going to, for example, ask her to leave my room because she rolled her eyes.
Or expect her to act like an adult.
Or expect her to act like an adult, right? So, I mean, I think you raise an interesting point, but the reality is that once they get into our space and we're responsible for them, we got to do what we can.
Is that your perspective of equity? Because I wanted to ask you, what is yours?
Well, I would like to work towards, emancipation, liberation, right? That's where that's where I would like to go, but I do know that it's very difficult to get to that place. Yeah. So, working within our broken system, I'm working on a paper right now, so maybe you have to wait till it comes out. But trying to think about what can we do within our system, and one of those things is to really, really change the way in which we teach mathematics. Let's just start there. If you can't do nothing else, let's start there. So get rid of the worksheets, get rid of the lecturing, start doing group work, have some, wonderful tasks that people would actually be interested in thinking about. I mean, I can give you a laundry list of ways in which we can just change the instruction. Mm-hmm. And black girls will see some movement. Now, you haven't helped them necessarily with the racial identity, or maybe a little bit of the math identity, but there's a lot more things that can be changed. But even if teachers were to just think about how to change math instruction, I believe we would see a little bit of change. Mm-hmm. So this next question says, where and how do we, as a culture, where do we get our ideas about mathematics and about who can engage in mathematical knowledge? Where do we get our ideas? That's like a real question.
Popular culture.
Greek white men.
Greek white men. Where else?
TV, like these idealized movies about what does it mean to be a mathematician, what does it mean to be smart, etc.
Yes. Yes. Maybe one more.
You could definitely expand the TV to media. Like what we see is like the image, and what we get as just like Dr. Boucher said. This is a scientist, so you kind of internalize. Okay, so that's a scientist. Okay, that's a mathematician. I'm seeing this white male teacher in all of the math teacher roles. So that's what that's supposed to look like.
Yeah. So. This is a very powerful book. Anybody read it? You've read it?
No, I've just a comment.
Yes.
That when you say culture, it depends which culture you're talking about.
Well, and you're absolutely right. United States. I'm talking about the United States.
Because if it's in Asian culture, you get a concept from your family. Like I got it from a family that nobody was good at math, so please don't try it.
Wow. So I mean, I think that's relevant as well.
It's very important. It's more than relevant. It's super important.
Yeah, it is.
And that happens here too.
Just on TV commercials in other countries, do not produce negative images of mathematics. It just like coexists. And where here, it seems always negative.
Exactly.
Or like,
yeah, it is. So anybody read Sarah's book?
Geeky.
Geeky, yeah. So Inventing the Mathematician, Gender, Race, and Our Culture Understanding of Mathematics is a very powerful book. She's not a mathematician. She's a professor in gender and women's studies. But this is a really powerful argument that she makes. And she says that, we do have representations of what it means to be a mathematician. And she's like, I would like for you to consider like these 4 places for where we get our understanding about who math is. So she's talking about textbooks, the history of mathematics, portraits of mathematics, and then the field of ethnomathematics. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 1 and 2. You can get the book and you can read more. But when you see this, now, do we have any mathematics in the room? Anybody get their PhD in mathematics?
I didn't want to define it.
So the history of mathematics is a class that I think they still take it if you're getting a math degree. But in that textbook, you know, when they're listing like the mathematicians and things like that, most of them are white and most of them are men. So if you think about this is the curriculum, you know, that you're engaging with, you're taking in, all you see is like white males. Now, think about it. Even when you're walking down the hallway of the math building and you're walking and you like, you know, look to the side and you see those pictures, right, of different mathematicians or whatever, you, even like the faculty, right, you see basically white men, right? When you go to conferences, who are the keynote speakers? White men, generally. So she's trying to help us visualize who we have, we meaning our society, who we have decided who can do math or who is a mathematician, and what does that person look like. And so she argues that these discourses shape mathematical subjectivity by limiting the way, and I put this in because she says like minorities. So I'm saying limiting the way Black women and girls are able to see themselves as practitioners of math. So the question, you know, to just sort of think about is, who is a mathematician? So if we want more Black girls to major in mathematics or to major in a science that's a heavy math-based, you know, science, there's a lot that we have to think about, a lot that we have to change, and a big part of that is helping them to see that this is something that they can do, that they can develop strong identities, like that's what I study, in these spaces. So, inventing the mathematician is really a blueprint for how to engage in what I would call a deconstructive project, revealing the limited and problematic nature of the normative construction of mathematical subjectivity, like who is a mathematician? Therefore, I argue that math is embedded in whiteness and white supremacy. Now, I have a handout for you that talks about whiteness and white supremacy that tries to help you understand the slight nuance between those things. And racial literacy and consciousness is imperative to move the work forward. I'm not going to go through that. That's basically just information. But we know that whiteness is a social construct that was created years and years and years and years and years and years ago. And if you don't know the immigrant story of this country, you should know that when the Anglos first came over here, you know, they established themselves. They were like white, you know, straight noses, all of those characteristics. But when like the Poles and the Italians and the Irish came, they were like, what are you doing? You don't belong here. So if they're gonna treat their own people that way, then what makes you think that they're not going to treat folks who are not considered European in just the same way, or if not worse? So the point, I tell people this, you need to understand your own immigrant story, you know, so that you can see how whiteness has been, how it's been socially constructed over time. So because I always try to think about solutions or what can we do, I have here that if you care about this work, because everybody doesn't, and it's okay, it's nothing personal, but if you care about this work, hopefully you can find some inspiration in this one of my books here, where I invited white faculty to write their narratives about how they came to find this work important. What happened in your life that made you want to care? To change your teaching, to change the way you engage with students, like what happened for you? And so interrogating whiteness and relinquishing power, white faculty's commitment to racial consciousness in STEM classrooms. And one of the things that, you know, we found is that white teachers that were racially conscious about who they are, about their white privilege, and how that plays out, it was connected to teaching excellence. So their students were doing well. It was more inclusive in those spaces. I'm not saying that this is perfect. Please don't walk away with that. I'm just saying that I think it's a good way to sort of inspire people that may not know how to get started or what to do. Okay? Now, this is Robin DiAngelo's work. I highly recommend this book, White Fragility. And so she talks about like this idea of racial literacy, which is the same thing for me as like racial consciousness. And she says, you know, we have frames and we have lenses for sort of understanding like how we develop those things. And the frames are sort of those larger ideas that we have about group identity. So she gives us examples. So like sexuality is an example of a frame, right? And these are sort of the words and the discourse that we have to sort of talk about those things. And then this idea of the lens, right, and the glasses. Those are the aspects of identity that are sort of more unique to like, who am I? Of what we think of ourselves, our family. And so questions to ponder about notions of our lenses, this is just, you don't have to answer these, just things to think about, is how did your family shape you? So if you grew up in a white, high-income community and you never saw, and everybody in that community was like that, you didn't even see any poor white people, then that shaped probably how you how you think about the world, about other people that look different from you. And so those are really important questions to think about. How did the neighborhood, region, country in which you grew up influence how you see the world? And then I just highlighted this because I thought it was really good. Because our society emphasizes our lenses, the things that we come, the people we come from, over the frames, like those larger constructs, many of us are not skilled in reflecting on our group membership. As race is one of these groups, developing racial literacy requires that we push against our socialization and temporarily suspend our focus on the lenses and focus on our frames. And that's another book that she wrote, What Does It Mean to Be White? She really is an outstanding scholar who addresses this, I think, in a really thoughtful way. So she's not calling people race. She's white, by the way. She's not. It's irrelevant and unproductive to call people racist. She focuses on structures in our country, focuses on these things. This is why I just love her work, because it keeps the conversation going. And I will just tell you, I've done 10 talks since I've been at Vanderbilt. Those invitations have come from math departments. They have not come from the education department. And this work has been, I think, significant in opening up people's minds. And, people come, they don't want to leave, they want to talk, which I think is a good thing. And I think something might be happening, and the majority of these schools have been in the South.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. No, go ahead.
Very recently, the Mathematical Association of America, where most post-secondary mathematics departments are attending, has been pushing for equity. So a lot of the math faculty members are struggling what it means, this thing that they have not explicitly ever really have
Absolutely.
to. Now they have to. So maybe this is also a wonderful moment where they're looking for what we can learn about this, because now it's becoming important by MAA as well, etc.
That's right. And when I go up in there, I tell them, I say, look, I know this is not your literature. You don't read this, right? So how do we work together to help you think about these issues, and what does it look like within your realm of influence as a faculty member, right? And so we are able to, have deeper conversations, and people can see what it is that I'm talking about. So here's sort of the hope and what I call the healing. So raise your hand if you've heard of the term intersectionality. Okay. So these are the Black feminist scholars that you will want to read if you want to understand intersectionality concepts. So Ida B. Wells, Audre Lorde, Angela Davis, Bell Hooks, Patricia Hill Collins, and Kimberly Crenshaw. So generally, people make the mistake when they write and they start with Kimberly Crenshaw. But Kimberly Crenshaw did not start the ideas of intersectional oppression, like this notion of a single issue. Ida B. Wells was fighting for the intersectional racial and gender justice in the 18th century, 19th century, early 19th century, okay? What Kimberly did is she came up with the beautiful word, intersectionality. And so I always tell people that because you want to honor previous thought leaders that were doing this work well before Crenshaw. But the point is that it's a theoretical way, it's a pedagogical way, and it's a methodological way for understanding really any marginalized group's experiences. So LGBTQ, gender nonconforming, any group that is oppressed that are bringing these multiple identities together. So it's not just race, it's religion, it's ability, it's all of those things. But for me, it's about understanding Black women and girls mathematics, experiences in mathematics, and how we can deconstruct those experiences to really illuminate latent power in interlocking systems of oppression. So power is latent because we don't really see it. Ain't nobody gonna sit up and call you a bad math student, or they're not gonna say these things directly, right? They're gonna do things like, well, welcome class to Calc 2. This is, the hardest course in the math sequence, and 3/4 of you will fail, right? So that's like the communication. Or if they see that a student is failing and the student doesn't show up for 3 weeks, they'll just be prepared to fail that student rather than pick up the phone, call, find the friends to try to figure out like what's wrong, what's going on, right? So that's what I mean by latent power. There's a hierarchy, there's power there. And generally the faculty member or whatever, those people are in charge, those are the folks that, basically can make these decisions that can make or break students of color, their experience. So, single axis interventions. We have things like the CARMS, which is the Conference for African American Researchers in the Mathematical Sciences. This is a group of Black mathematicians that meet and have a conference, but the assumption is that we only need to focus on race. So that says that Black women and Black men have the same needs. In some of the empirical research, some of the interviews that I did, some of these Black girls said, well, we joined the NSBE, National Association of Black Engineers, thinking we would find support there. Well, what was happening was that there were gender issues. There were Black men saying, oh, you're taking what? Oh, you're majoring in what? So still sort of questioning their intellect, right? Then you have the Association for Women in Mathematics. I love this group. I'm like a part of, their initiatives. But the reality is that the focus is gender, and the assumption is that racialized sexism is not real. So at these things, this is like white women, right? Because there isn't space for women of color to bring their needs to the space, right? So I pulled this research project. Whose project is this? Girls Power in Making? Is that you?
Yeah.
All right.
It was about Black and brown girls.
Well, that's fine, but when I was looking at it, I didn't, in the abstract, I didn't see that it was like focused on Black and brown. And plus we've talked, But when we say girl power in making.
But I do see now your point,
right?
Because we have a title and then we have a subtitle.
That's right.
So I think in the subtitle we say it, but not in the title. But I can see how that making that explicit would have been more significant than just saying girls, because then that would bring that kind of tension that it's black and brown girls' power in making.
Yeah. And it feeds honestly in just to the normativity that whiteness, that white is normal, right? And so we know that nomenclature is very important. So, saying girls of color power in making, is a slight change, but would communicate a very different message, I think, to the world or whoever is interested.
As I said, in the subtitles, we do say, like, it's a slash it and we have a subtitle. But like you were saying, I think semiotics does matter.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So thank you for letting me pick on you. But now we connected. We're sisters now, right?
I'm actually thankful because when you put that, I'm like, I know why she put it there.
Well, I also wanted to demonstrate that I did read a little bit and was trying to understand this research center and the work that you all are doing, and how you all can push even further.
We just learned something really important.
This is what I call an intersectional approach. So I have been arguing and trying to write about, what does it need to look like? And this is hard to think about, what does it need to look like? So I've been arguing for intersectional interventions. Like, if we were to create an intervention to try to help support these things, what would it look like? So at Vanderbilt, my colleagues at Vanderbilt University awarded me a very large sum of money to study black women and girls in society. And I almost was in tears because this was like a 10-year process kind of thing. These were very high level folks coming from the physics department, the music school. You know how you have to communicate about your tenure file, about what you do in regular language, and people have to decide if your work is worthy or whatever. So the fact that they awarded me the TIPS grant, which is almost $500,000 to do this, said to me they really believe in what I'm trying to do. So part of the project was to start the STEM Sister Network, which essentially is an affinity group for women who identify as black. We have postdocs, we have graduate students, and faculty that are a part of this. We did not include undergraduates because undergraduates really do have a different set of needs. But we might be, trying to change that as we go. Anybody is welcome. Anybody. What we say to people is the focus will be on black women and girls. So if that's something that you want to participate in, then you are, more than welcome. But we don't discriminate against anybody. So I just want that to be clear. This is just a picture that we had of sort of the end of celebration. So this is sort of a pilot right now, and we're going to continue to work on it. But we have workshops. So I did a needs assessment because I don't believe in wasting people's time. I said, what do you want? People talked about they want to learn how to write winning grants. They want to learn how to keep themselves whole. And all of these women, by the way, are in STEM postdocs or PhDs. So, there's some are in the medical school, biological sciences, physics, they're all over the place at Vanderbilt. I didn't even know there were that many. And so those workshops are to meet their needs. And so we're doing things on, like I said, writing grants, publication process, job searching, all those kinds of things. And so in addition to that, we're trying to also include healing aspects. Like, how do you stay whole in an environment that believes you should not even be there? Right? How do you, not have a bunch of health issues, mental issues when you have to, present with colleagues that, sort of look you up and down or don't think that you belong. These are real issues that, many black women are dealing with. And so this is supposed to be a sacred space, a space to support them, for them to feel like you got to move past the white gaze. You have to become self-actualized. you do belong in that space, right? And so I want to end with some wonderful Black women that are all mathematicians. This was Euphemia. She was the very first one that I told you. She graduated from Catholic University. This is my niece, Turner, who is she always has some kind of math manipulative. She's like 3 years old. This was actually a video that her mom took of her and sent me, because I'm always like wanting videos. And she's like, square, you know what I mean? Like, you can barely understand what she's saying, but there's some math words that I really understood what she was saying. Anybody know these three young ladies? So, Michaela, India, and Bria were finalists for the NASA competition. Does this ring a bell?
Yeah.
And then they were, that group online basically said, don't vote for them. You're just voting for them because they're Black. But they created a water filtration system for their schools because the water was bad. And so they were the finalists at NASA. And then, of course, NASA did do the right thing, and they shut the voting down. I don't think they won the competition, but some major company gave them each $4,000 for them to continue their research to try to continue to do this. But here it is. This happened in 2018, maybe 17. You have these three high school girls that are thinking about how to solve a real problem in their community and are using scientific thinking, mathematics, things that we want people to do, and still being, scrutinized and all of those different things. And then the rest of those are just, Chelsea's at Illinois, Talithia is at NSF right now as a program officer, but she's also at Howard. Talithia Williams is at Harvey Mudd. Gloria Granville is probably retired. She was one of those early ones. She went to Yale to get her PhD in mathematics. Gloria Hewitt, I think she's actually deceased. I've been looking for her, trying to write her letters, but she did her entire career at the University of Montana. The University of Montana. And then Marjorie Lee Brown is deceased, but I think she was at, somewhere in the Carolinas, but she ended up teaching, I think, at Baylor. I mean, these schools that, that they ended up going to were very interesting. So anyway, just wanted to end on a happy note that Black women do belong in these spaces. There's a lot of work we have to do, but I'm excited about what we can do together in our future. So thank you so much. I don't even know what time we started.
We have time for a few questions.
Oh, we do?
Yes.
Okay. Because I thought I was going over. No, I'm good. Jay. Dr. J.
So I'm looking at the table there. So looking at Black women PhD in mathematics, they are 3 to 4% of the women. Let's say now the 250 about.
Thank you.
So do you know the ratio for Black men?
No.
Would you venture a guess? It's going to be less or?
It'll probably be a little more. Not much more, but probably a little more.
I think it's around 11% maybe, less than 11%. I've looked at the Hispanic men and African American men, so it's the percentage while it's maybe 1 or 2% more. It's not that high. Yeah. Women are
much less than.
Okay. Yeah. There's so another concept of intersectionality is called the matrix of domination. So essentially, it's like the complexity of a Black male could have privilege in a particular type of setting, right? But at the same time can be oppressed in another setting. And so maybe in math departments, Black men have more privilege in those spaces, right? Because we sort of put mathematics with being like a male kind of construct, not construct, but discipline, right? Now, I'm not saying that that's true for everybody. I'm just saying that that's the complexity of Black women, because you know we have to deal with like the gender stuff, but we also have to deal with like the racial stuff. And there's an article that was put in the Crimson by this young lady who was a math major at Harvard. Basically, she surveyed all of the Ivy Leagues, what is it, 6 of them, and talked about the experiences of women in these math departments. And of course, I wrote an op-ed and I was like, okay, you're talking about white women. What about the women of color that are in these spaces? Now, I know there's probably only 1 or 2, but even to acknowledge that there's a nuance is really important to do. But see, again, these are the things that people aren't thinking about. This is what I mean by preserving whiteness and white supremacy, because, you know, had she done that, even though it was a slight little thing, she would have been disrupting, even in a little way, this notion of you know, whiteness, white males or whatever, being the only folks that, you know, do math, or even just acknowledging other women of color's experiences. Other questions? Yes.
What did you think of the movie Hidden Figures?
You know,
how did it relate to your research?
You know, that's like a really good question. So I both loved it, but also found it problematic. So of course we love it because it's showing a counter narrative of, you know, who can do math. I read the book as well. Actually, I stopped after maybe 3/4 of the book because I was like, okay, I just can't take it anymore. It was just getting a little. She's a journalist, I think.
Shetterly, yeah.
So anyway, she talked about how when she was being raised in Langley, I guess, is that the name of the town?
Virginia.
Virginia's the state. But, huh?
Yes,
so long.
Yeah, it's like Langley or something. But anyway, her point was that doing math and science was very normal for her and that community during this time. In fact, she said, you know, my aunt was a scientist, my Sunday school teacher, you know, taught math. So like math and science in that space in Virginia was huge, like an epicenter, right? So I'm thinking, how come we don't know about this? Like, why did we have to have this book to, you know, sort of bring out those issues? But then they act as if it's like a thing that sort of, you know, just happened. When there's like a whole history of Black women in particular participating in mathematical and scientific thinking, supporting our country in a variety of different ways. So, you know, that was sort of like the thing that I sort of took issue with, and all of a sudden it became like a movement. And I don't want to deliver the wrong message. I, of course, appreciated that. And there were little Black girls all over this country like going to see that movie to be inspired. But then when you get back into your class, your 3rd grade class, you still don't get an opportunity to be positioned, right, as someone who's making mathematical contributions. So it feels, you know, kind of feels like a oxymoron, not an oxymoron, but a paradox.
Do you think that it helped the majority of the white K12 educators to maybe take that in and teach a different way?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Just because, you know, I mean, I've been a coach of math teachers. You know, it takes like embedded coaching, you know, every day, reflecting, you know, to really create change in your practice. I mean, it's just hard. Y'all know this, right? It's very, very difficult to create the change. And so while it can spark like inspiration to actually see the change in the classroom and in what people do, that has to be like every day. And this is really hard work. You know, there's lots of implications for teacher education programs. There's lots of implications for people who design professional development for math and science teachers. People want to stick with the content, which we need good content. But if you, kick little black girls out of your class for rolling their eyeballs or for not giving up their cell phone, you all know about the Spring Valley, right? The Spring Valley, you guys have to watch it tonight on YouTube. That's the Spring Valley. They were in an algebra class and the little black girl got picked up and dragged across the floor because she wouldn't give up her cell phone. And this happened to be a math class. So they done wasted all kind of instructional time because this situation is happening, because the teacher felt like, she needed to show her authority, over this, black girl. Well, if you understood some deep black culture and black girlhood, you know to never front a black girl in public. You just can't do that. You won't win. Period. You won't win. So how do you take your authority back and figure out how to do that? So one of those things is to build a relationship with her, have some private conversations and say, look here, you can't be disrupting my class, so what are we going to do? I want you to be successful. In fact, you are going to be successful, so what's the solution? What are we going to do? Bring her into the problem-solving process. It was amazing to me when I was coaching math teachers how they were just afraid to bring students into the problem-solving process. I'm like, excuse me, this is what mathematicians do. They try to solve problems. So why are you not bringing them into the conversation and taking some of the work off of you? So when you have a real conversation, they're not going to bring silly stuff like, well, I just don't have to do my homework. They're not going to say anything silly like that when you're serious, right? They're going to come up with some real solutions about what they can do. So maybe they might ask you, I need an extra day for homework. Or, whatever that is. But bringing them into the conversation is very, very important. Because you want to have joy. And you want to smile. And you don't want to be tired, at the week's end for, fighting with your kids because they are, acting up. I taught middle school, so I know, exactly, what this is. But I love that age group. Because these little people, I can't have a conversation with you because you're so busy talking about he looked at me or your nose is right. That is not my gift. Middle school kids are my gift. And high school kids, maybe. But yeah. Any other questions?
I think we should take this opportunity to thank Dr. Joseph for coming
and sharing with us.
And thank all of you for
Yes, it's end of the semester.
This is an awesome turnout.
And you guys showed up. Thank you. Okay. Woo.